Hello and welcome to a very special edition of GCN's How To with Professor Asger Jeukendrup, who has very kindly agreed to give us some more of his time after we did that Ask with him. And we got loads of questions from people on how to really personalise their nutrition for their particular problems. Professor Jeukendrup, thank you very much for having us in your beautiful office again.
Thank you for having me.
I've mentioned before your numerous achievements, but you've worked in the field of sports nutrition and performance nutrition and exercise science for many years. And I know that you've worked with some very high-level sports teams in football, cycling. You've worked with Chrissy Wellington, Haile Gebrselassie. Tell us a little about your role in with high-level athletes, advising them in nutrition, I think.
I think it's a relationship that works both ways. So I listen carefully to what elite athletes tell me, and then they tell me what their problems are, and those are things that we've taken to the lab to try and find the answers, and then hopefully I can then help them with these answers, and that's how I've worked for many years. And indeed, I had the opportunity to work with a number of great athletes, and I have to say that I have learned a lot. And I hope that they learned a bit as well.
Yeah, I think they have. But you should know that Asger is also himself a very keen triathlete, cyclist, runner, so he knows about the user end of sports nutrition as well. So anyway, let's get down to business. We had quite a few questions from people who wanted to know about nutrigenomics and whether they should go out and get DNA testing to find out precisely what they should be eating in their event. So we thought we'd come and ask you about that. So could you tell us about what you think about that to start with?
Yeah, I think first of all, I think personalization is the future in this field. For me, there's no question about this. Every individual is different, and we need to address that. Nutrigenomics has been suggested as a solution for this problem, where you measure genes and then out of that rolls some advice. And I think some of that comes from the medical world, where we see a lot of this, where based on your genetic makeup, you may be prone to certain diseases, or you may respond to certain medication. That work in the medical field is all based on a very large number of studies, and also the studies themselves are very large, sometimes 10,000s of people that were followed in time. Some people that get the disease, some people that don't get the disease. And based on that, you can see then that certain genes send people in different directions.
It's a statistical correlation.
It's very much based on statistics, so it's probabilities.
Yeah.
Now, in nutrition we see similar, and this is not sports nutrition now, but just in general nutrition, we see something similar. We have fewer studies there, but still the studies are very, very large. When we come to sports nutrition, it's a little bit different picture, because there we have actually very few studies, and the studies that we have, they don't have 10,000s of people. Typically, those studies have 6 or 8 or 10 people at best. And it is very, very difficult to draw conclusions from those small numbers of studies with small sample sizes to do a really complex question.
A similar problem to in sports sites in general, where training protocols are tested on quite small groups of people, and it's very hard to generalise to elite level or to people in general. Yeah,
that's correct.
So at the moment you'd say that maybe a DNA test is not the solution, that it'll tell you, bang, take this bar, this gel, and that carbohydrate drink. It's more.
Yeah, I think there's several reasons why I think that it's not the solution yet. Like, first of all, because the field we have so few studies to base this on, and it's too early days. But also the real reasons why you need to eat something to perform are probably not so much dependent on genetics.
Yeah.
For example, the exercise intensity and the duration, the type of sport you do, determine much more what you need than your genome.
So the reason that I don't respond the same way to bar X or gel Y as my friend does is more to do with how hard I'm riding, or what I've trained myself to eat as well. Presumably that plays a part as well.
Or even what your goal is, right? If your goal is weight loss, or your goal is to perform tomorrow, you're eating differently.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, so So one should try to personalize one's nutrition, but maybe not based purely on DNA.
Yeah, that's correct. And maybe in the future it'll start to play a bigger role. There are some examples where maybe it is useful already, but it's very, very early days. Like an example is caffeine. We know that some people are much more sensitive to caffeine than other people. That is, you can trace that back to the genome. You can measure that. Oh. So that's one of the few things that we can already do today.
Oh, right. So I thought that I was not very sensitive to coffee because I drink too much of it, but it's partly my genes. Okay, it's good to know. Given that there are all these different variables about exercise intensity and goal and, just personal preference, can you tell me how we as cyclists should go about planning our nutrition for either training or racing, or whether there is some interaction between those? There's so much information out there. It feels like sometimes there's too much information from many different sources, and it's very easy to just try and copy what other people are doing. Where's the starting point, do you think?
I think for me the starting point is always understanding the sport itself. Yeah. What is it that determines performance in that sport? So I think it's almost going back to basics.
Yeah.
Like what is it in this particular sport that determines performance? And in cycling, for example, that's going to be different of course, in mountain stages than it is in time trials. And so it really depends. But you have to go back to that basic. Once you have a good understanding of that, I think the question to ask is, okay, now with your training, what are you trying to achieve? What are your main goals?
Yep.
So that's for me is the next step. And as I said earlier, if your goal is weight loss, your program will look quite a bit different than when it is purely to perform. So goals is next. And then it is about what timing are we talking about? Are we talking about the 24-hour diet? Are we talking about what to eat before training? Are we talking about what to eat during? Yeah. So that's the other component.
Yeah. So if we were to take, say, a cyclist who's fairly experienced, but they're taking on a big event this year, for example, like a long Sportive, let's say 5 to 7 hours long, major undertaking, how would they go about knowing how to time their nutrition? There are, I believe there are guidelines for how much carbohydrate someone should take in if they're working above a certain level for a certain amount of time. Especially if it's a key goal, it's right to keep eating as much carbohydrate as you can, really?
Yeah, not necessarily, because that depends on what your goal is. If your goal is to perform at your maximum, the advice will be slightly different than when your goal is to reach the finish, right? And to complete the event. And then if your goal is to complete the event, you probably don't need as much.
Yep.
So that's one factor. The other factor is your absolute level. So the power that your power output is really important. So if someone produces 300 watts versus 150 watts on average, that's going to be a very different demand. So that's important to understand. And I see a lot of athletes who maybe take longer, who fuel the same way that a professional rider would do, and that's not necessary.
No, overdoing it on carbohydrate is an extra strain on the body that it can't cope with under high performance loads, and if you're trying to digest and put out power at the same time, it's not always a great.
That is definitely a challenge.
Yeah. Great, thank you. So how would we go about knowing about how much carbohydrate to take in during an event?
Mm-hmm. We do have some guidelines for that, and the amount you need to take in probably depends on the duration of the exercise. So if it's only an hour, 2 hours, you need smaller amounts. Yeah. If you go over 2 hours, you need probably, say, between 30 and 60 grams of carbohydrate every hour.
Yeah.
If you take this really seriously, your power output is high and you're going over 2.5 to 3 hours. This is where you may even think to go higher than 60 grams per hour and up to 90 grams per hour. But this is where it gets a little bit tricky, because your body can absorb, most people's bodies can absorb up to about 60 grams per hour of any type of carbohydrate. and so that's no problem. If you go higher than 60 grams, then that may be a problem in terms of the absorption, unless you take the right types of carbohydrate.
Okay.
So I would always advise do not go higher than 60 grams per hour, unless you know about this and you know which carbohydrates to select.
Yeah.
The carbohydrates you need to select to go higher are a combination of glucose and fructose. Or maybe maltodextrins and fructose.
And those are the easiest to absorb?
Yeah, so that combination, the technical side of that story is those are two types of carbohydrates that use different transporters in the intestine.
Yeah.
And if you only use one transporter, it just gets saturated, and this is why you cannot absorb more than 60 grams per hour.
Okay.
If you use the two transporters, then that means that you can absorb glucose and fructose at the same time, and we've shown that you can then go up to, well, even higher than 90 grams per hour.
So you've got like a 2-lane road instead of a 1-lane bottleneck.
Correct.
Great, thank you. What about, so we had questions from people saying, obviously that fat is much more energy dense per gram, so if you could, why not take on 60 grams of fat per hour and you've got way more energy? It's not as simple as that, though, is it, in terms of absorption into the body? No,
it's not. And unfortunately, well, there's two issues with fat during exercise. One is that the delivery is very slow, whereas carbohydrate is absorbed really quickly and is in your blood within minutes. With fat, that's a different story, and this may take hours. So by the time the bulk of the fat actually gets absorbed, you may be done with your ride. So it's not the ideal
more energy for the party.
Source.
Yes.
It's not a problem to take a little bit of fat on during exercise, but it's not a good fuel.
Okay, thank you. And then I come to the question of what kind of carbohydrates. So you mentioned fructose, glucose, maltodextrin. What about these energy bars that are slower release, say based on oats? Or I know that obviously there are many different carbohydrate chain lengths, and that affects the absorption time. Personally, I really like eating flapjacks and oat-based products. I have a soft spot for those. What do you think about those in sort of high intensity events?
Yeah, in high intensity events, that wouldn't be my first choice.
Oh well.
So in training and lower intensity event, it doesn't matter. It's not about delivering the energy as fast as possible, but in high intensity events, in races, this is where you want to deliver the energy as quickly as possible. You also, at the same time, you want your intestine, your stomach, to be as empty as possible, because you want that the carbohydrate to go through that as quickly as possible. And so you only get that, unfortunately, with the faster sugars.
And oats have too much fiber and protein and a little bit of fat in, so they slow the stomach
and
emptying.
often the products that have them also, they have a little bit more fat, a little bit more protein. They're all things that slow down the gastric emptying and thus the delivery of the carbohydrate. Yeah,
and slowing down gastric emptying can also lead to stomach cramping, I think, if you have too much food just sitting in your stomach when you're trying to basically pedal hard. I've experienced that for sure. It's pretty unpleasant. Great, thanks, Asker. So we've got this rule of thumb or general rule for how much carbohydrate on average through an event when you're working hard. But in cycling events, there are often, obviously, obstacles in there. There are mountains, descents, corners. You know, maybe there's a sprint coming up or a place you have to be at the front, or portions of the course where you know you're going to be working very hard, and then portions when you're not. How do we adapt our nutrition to fit into the practicalities of a cycling course, and that maybe sometimes you just don't have a hand free to eat anything?
Well, there's two things you can do. Of course, you have to be very clever with where you eat. So we can say that from in a laboratory, it's easy, right? You could say, every 15 minutes you need to take on board something, and that's usually what we do in the lab. But if you're riding outside, and there are mountains and hills and corners, it's very tricky sometimes. So it is important to think about this beforehand. And in the work that I do with professional cyclists, we do this. We sit down, we say, okay, this is the plan. This is what we need to consume in the race. What are the best moments to do this? And they can usually tell me where the best moments are because they've ridden those races before. And then we plan it out that way. The other thing that is important is that you need to get to your target of carbohydrate. But we've also shown that it doesn't matter so much whether it comes from a drink or a gel or a bar that is low in fat and fiber and protein. So you can mix and match, and usually it means that in the early parts of races, for example, when the intensity is a little bit lower and you can still eat, use more solid food. In the last couple of hours of races, it's mostly gels because that only takes like a few seconds to take. So those are things that you can play with. Pick the right moments and pick the right products at those moments.
Yeah, that's certainly what I would find, that I'd study the race course beforehand, or nowadays maybe a Sportive course, and work out where I'd have a hand free to eat anything, so not on the descent for me. And but also not at the, I wouldn't eat a massive bar at the bottom of a climb where I was going to go hard, because it would come straight back up again, which is not pretty.
Yeah, but you see that people do make those mistakes. It's sometimes just the beginning of the climb is a time where you can actually eat, but then you're still chewing when at the steep parts. So.
Yeah, you don't want to be chewing when someone attacks and you've got to go with them. It's very messy. Great, thank you very much. I know that you've developed a tool for athletes to plan their nutrition during events and during training. Could you tell us a little bit about that, about what it's called and how it works?
We call that program CORE. What CORE really is that you have a sports nutrition scientist in your pocket. You can personalize your own nutrition plan. What you get is all science-based, but also at the same time based on you. It is also very practical because it uses the products that you want to use. So you get a plan that is just bulletproof, and you can go into your event knowing that this will work.
I know that when I used CORE to plan my race nutrition, I actually wrote the plan on a bit of tape and stuck it on my top tube so that I knew, not that it was very complicated, but it reminded me that at kilometre 40 I should eat this and drink this, or have consumed that by then rather than all in one go. It was really helpful. Thank you very much. It's really interesting. I think that'll be really helpful for some of our viewers who have questions about how to plan their race nutrition, their training nutrition even. So I hope that helps answer some of your questions. If you would like to check out some of Asker's other huge knowledge on sports nutrition, you can have a look at this video down here where we put your questions to him, and a lot of questions about personalised nutrition came up, which we saved for this video, but there's lots of really interesting discussions down there in that video.